flooding is not just about the river. Flooding is about the drainage basin. It was triggered by what? It was triggered initially due to the collapse of the slope.
Right.
There are a lot of glacial lakes in Himalayas, in Indian region itself, which are at the verge of collapse. A huge chunks mass of ice, rocks collapsed in the high Himalayas. Basically, glacial lake outburst flood, when we talk about glacial lake outburst flood, is more about breach of glacial lakes, which are a pre-existing features.
Sir, there was a major flash flood event in Nepal recently. I'm sure you're heard of. When I first saw the news, I assumed that it was another case of extreme rainfall. But apparently, heavy rainfall wasn't the main trigger. What exactly, or let's say, the reason for that massive flood
So this
of
is
that
where
level?
this is where precisely geography becomes so important. To understand whole of the chain of the events, now precisely we will have to go right there from the flooded Nepal valleys
And
up to the higher Himalayas near Nepal-Tibet border.
okay, but what happened up there?
So what happened is a huge chunks mass of ice, rocks collapsed in the high Himalayas, and all of this debris just moved down into the river valley.
So you mean to say that it kind of created a dam?
Yes, all of this
temporary
debris blocked the flow of the river, that is the Lhende Khola river, and the course of Lhende Khola river was blocked, and it created a temporary dam.
So that temporary dam couldn't hold the water?
Definitely, because the water was continuously flowing into the valley, and so the water which was, or the river which was impounded by this debris, the impoundment was not able to hold the water, and eventually there was the breach of this debris dam, let's say.
Okay. So this particular phenomena reminds me of a concept called as a GLOF, glacial lake outburst flood. Is this pretty much the same thing? It similarly is the same thing, right?
No. Basically, glacial lake outburst flood, when we talk about glacial lake outburst flood, is more about breach of glacial lakes, which are a pre-existing features. So glacial lakes are formed in the ablation zone of the glaciers, where the glaciers melt, and from the meltwater of the glaciers, the moraine deposits from the glacier, they create the impoundment, and there is a pre-existing lake.
Okay.
Now this
okay.
pre-existing lake may breach, may not breach. It may exist forever like that itself. But in this particular case, this particular impoundment was created, or was formed due to the collapse of the slope.
Okay.
So it was a temporary formation which happened,
Got it.
and then this formation breached.
Okay. So the primary aspect of GLOF concept is that there has to be a lake by default because of the landform which has been formed in a particular fashion.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is as far as till now the preliminary reports what they suggest.
All right. So the flood is actually the last stage of this particular phenomenon.
Yes. So now overall what happened is the collapse of the slope happened. The debris blocked the Lhende Khola river. The impoundment was breached, and it flooded the downstream valleys.
Okay. But the entire process, like you explained, the debris which collapsed and all of these things, it happened high up in the mountains. But why was it so disastrous to the main city?
Absolutely. So now here comes the whole concept, underlying concept in disaster management. Okay, where flooding is not just about the river. Flooding is about the drainage basin.
Okay.
So if we have to understand this, we have said blocking of Lhende Khola river first thing. Now, when breach happened from this Lhende Khola river, the water went to its main river, which would be Koshi river, and from there moved on to other rivers such as Trishuli or Narayani river. Plus, why it was so disastrous? Multiple factors. First, high up in the Himalayas, so slopes are very steep, and so water comes down with great speed.
Okay.
Secondly, apart from that, again, in Himalayas, the feature of the valleys would be deep and narrow valleys. And so these narrow valleys do not allow the water to spread out, and so the force is amplified.
Okay.
And thirdly, going beyond that, because it was not just water which was coming down, but along with water, a lot of debris, boulders, rocks, sediments, everything came down with great speed and spread into its whole drainage basin. And that's why it became so disastrous.
Right,
And
right.
that's where the idea that whenever we are talking about disaster management, it is not about just the river. It's also about the drainage basin which is there. So the planning unit has to be drainage basin, not the river itself.
Okay. Because whenever these kind of events happen in Himalayas, we generally hear about climate change being the primary reason. So
Okay.
do you think this particular event has any direct relation with the climate change as a concept?
Now, this would not be a direct relationship that we would like to establish. Okay, because eventually, if you see whole of this chain of events that has happened, it was triggered by what? It was triggered initially due to the collapse of the slope,
Right.
the destabilization of the slope, and the collapse of the rock, collapse of the glacier that may have happened. So this is which was a geomorphic event rather which has happened.
Okay.
Indirectly, of course, climate change has some role to play, no doubt in that. We can indirectly connect to it because the climate change is now impacting the stability of the glaciers. So what is happening in cryosphere, the cryosphere destabilization, I can attribute to climate change, no doubt in that. So if one asks why the glacier collapsed, one of the answers probably can be due to the global warming. The temperatures are rising, so glaciers are becoming unstable along steep slopes.
Right.
But it cannot be a direct climate change related event. Rather, it was a geomorphic event leading to this
Right.
disaster.
Because the enormity of the flood, in fact, it was like an event which everybody would have probably heard, or probably for the first time ever got to know that the Himalayan ranges had so much of water. I mean, especially the glacial lakes or whatever. Is that like something that is mostly overlooked, or was it something that?
See, in terms of climate change, again, I will say the glacial lakes which are there. Okay, according to recent reports, there are a lot of glacial lakes in Himalayas, in Indian region itself, which are at the verge of collapse. That is
Okay.
due to the accelerated melting of the glaciers, which is related to climate change. But this was not that event. That's what we are trying
Okay.
to say.
Okay.
Okay, in fact, some reports have suggested that there was recorded weak seismic signals also. So people are saying probably an earthquake may have triggered this sort of landslide,
Right.
the slope destabilization. But this is not yet confirmed, and it was a weak seismic event. So whether that seismic event led to it, or it was just a basic general collapse of the slope that happened as landslides happen in Himalayas, as avalanches comes in Himalayas. It was such a natural event or was triggered by earthquake. As of now, it would be very premature to tell.
Okay.
But one thing for sure, that we are not going to attribute it directly as a causative factor
Okay.
to climate change.
Right. So, if anybody has to remember this particular concept in just one line, what would that be?
In fact, not even one line, one phrase, if one remembers. Okay, that is cascading hazard concept.
Okay.
So cascading hazard, what did happen? Okay, first the collapse of slope
Debris
happened,
hit,
which
yeah.
resulted in the mass movement.
Mhm.
This blocked the river channel, damming it or impounding it. The impoundment breaches.
Okay.
It results in the flooding in the whole of the drainage basin. So eventually, how we understand the flash floods is mainly related to mostly meteorological events. One will attribute it to the cloudburst events, very heavy rainfall events. Okay, but this was not something like that.
So basically, this was not just a disastrous or a flood event, but rather it was a process.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. And that is where we will have to understand the fragility of Himalayas and the disaster management approach in Himalayas, where the disaster management in Himalayas cannot be done in isolation. rather has to be understood in what I am calling as a cascading hazard,
Okay.
where one event may lead to another event, and that event again may lead to some other form of disaster
So
itself.
it's like the flood which happened downstream would have started many kilometers
Upstream in the higher
Himalayas.
Himalayas, absolutely, yes.
I think that's about it, sir. So got a very clear picture about what happened. I think hopefully we'll have to wait for the further reports to be out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, the impacts and the probably casualties, the damages, for that we still will have to wait for the reports to come out. But initially, as it looks like, how geography is related to this particular disaster, this is pretty much the understanding right now.
Thank you, sir.